Hi, I'm Liz Whiteacre. Let's take a look at how we invite readers into our poems. This week in the course, we're focusing on revision and reflecting on how we are using different elements of literature to create an experience for our reader that leaves them with a new understanding of something or perhaps the overwhelming emotion after they read one of our poems. We'll also be participating as readers in workshop and thinking about how poems have been constructed by other people and the effect that those choices have on us. We already talked earlier in the term when we focused on inviting readers into your stories and personal essays, a lot of different techniques you can use, and all of those things apply to poetry. So from the title that you pick for your poem, here's a slide from that earlier video, to how you're choosing to set up your point of view. Is this going to be a poem that is third person omniscience, second person objective, first person limited omniscient? All of those different techniques from prose still apply when you're writing poetry. And also thinking about the information you're starting with. So as we talked about, trying to invite readers in by orienting them and introducing them to the world that we're going to be having them live in during the course of the story or personal essay. We want to be mindful of all of those things in our poem as well, even if it's something that's only 17 syllables or 3 lines or maybe 10 syllables or 50 lines. All of those things still apply. So you're bringing to your practice of poetry a ton of skills that you can test out in this medium. I thought it would be helpful in this particular video to focus on punctuation. What's up with that in poetry? A lot of students who are new to the practice of poetry consider poetry to be kind of a woohoo, no rules, I can do whatever I want. But as we've learned throughout the course, no rules, doing whatever you want, and people not understanding what it is you're trying to do can lead to frustration, miscommunication, and disappointment on the part of both the poet and the reader. So what we're doing in our poems is being very intentional about the choices we make. Here is that poem we took a look at earlier this term. This is one that I've written, and I'm showing it to you again in prose. So we were looking at this in our short pieces unit. In this particular poem, I've taken out the punctuation because I wanted you to see what it feels like when you don't have those cues that we've all come to rely on and just kind of intuitively take in and don't pay all that much of attention to. So I'm going to try to read through the first 3 lines. And this is a poem I know well. So when you're coming to a poem that you don't know well, it's something that you might want to think about. So Therapy's song. This purple carpet smells of stale sweat, the soft staccato of steel plates in the circuit grounds grunts of men and women who've come here to work. Our voices join this found song, encouragements, chides, jokes between sets and that's just, oh, I made it past 2, but that's as far as I can go with that one breath. So when I've stripped the punctuation here, I've taken away those cues we come to rely on, like a period where I know that I can take a breath and a new idea is starting. Or for example, there are a lot of lists in this poem. And so when you're coming to those different things like gym, warm muscle systems and strength training machines, elliptical trainers, recumbent, but those commas that had appeared will sometimes make a big difference in how much mental gymnastics my brain has to do as it's trying to take in. So a reason I could choose to go with this type of structure for my poem could be if I, as the speaker, right, if I'm kind of putting myself in the position of the person who's in this room looking at all of these things, feel very overwhelmed, like, whoa, so much to look at, right? Sensory overload, and maybe feeling very breathless. Whew, maybe the speaker has just finished the workout or is in the middle of the workout. Oh, this purple carpet smells of stale sweat because I'm sitting here doing push-ups and my face keeps coming really close to them, right? So the emotional response I'm giving my reader could be in tune with the emotional response that the speaker's having in the moment. So hold that. We're going to come back to the thematic intention. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Here's that same poem in prose structure with the punctuation put in. And I wanted to show you without first, because you've already seen this one this way. So this purple carpet smells of stale sweat. The soft staccato of steel plates in the circuit grounds, grunts of men and women who've come here to work. Our voices join this found song. So as I'm coming to those very familiar moments of punctuation, my brain automatically knows what to do, right? Stale sweat, period. The soft, right? I know I can take a breath. I know that a new idea is coming and I have kind of finished off something. So it's helping me process that information versus when I don't have those little cues. So if you think about something that has been punctuated according to convention or consistently, right? You don't have to follow all the rules, but if you're consistent in those choices, then you are guiding your readers through and they come to know what to expect. Something I didn't think of, I should put it in here. You might have a moment where you take away the periods, but you leave the capital letters when a new sentence would start. And so that might be a more subtle visual cue. You don't want end stops because maybe there is no stopping in this poem and it's constant motion, putting stress on the body. So you could take out the periods and commas and colons and semicolons, but still leave, right? Capital this, capital the, capital our. And that capitalization might cue the reader more quickly that we're shifting gears and going to a new observation versus not having that at all. Let's take a look at this in free verse. So as we've been exploring free verse, we've looked at a lot of different reasons to be able to create an end line. In this, I have chosen to break on mostly verbs and nouns. And that's a personal preference of mine as a poet and reader. I like that idea, right? Sweat stays in my head until I get to the next line, and circuit and song and checkups and trainers and bands and grows. I just happen to appreciate that as a reader. So that's something that you can consider. And we took a look at other things in jamming, right? Ending at punctuation marks, which we don't have in this poem, so we might be relying on other elements. This is slowing the poem down because every time I hit an end line, I'm going to take a breath as a reader versus the long prose where I wasn't given that breath until I got to the end of the margin. So let's take a look at this one. This purple carpet smells of stale sweat. The soft staccato of steel plates in the circuit grounds grunts of men and women who've come here to work. Our voices join this found song. So in this moment, if I wanted to pause before our voices, rather than in jamming and kind of breaking up that sentence at the verb come, I could choose to go all the way out here to work and then start the next line with our voices, and I would have that natural pause. That's something that you can consider if you're not going to use punctuation and you don't have a speaker who is just right, oh, the thing that I can't take a breath and oh, I'm totally stressed out. You might not want to use prose, right? That really, really quick breathlessness, no breaks, no stops. Exploring no punctuation with free verse where you can rely on those line breaks can be helpful. Now, maybe you've kind of come through here and you noticed that there are commas around chides, right? So I'm looking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. It starts with encouragements, comma, chides, comma, jokes between sets. Now, if I were reading a poem or reading your work when you submitted it to workshop, I'd really wonder about that moment in the poem because it seems pretty important. All of the other punctuation marks have been taken out. So why is that there? And it's kind of in the center, and it's really drawing my attention. Why do I need that extra breath in between encouragements, chides, jokes? Why is that? That's something that you should be asking during workshop when you're looking at work or when you're reviewing your own work before you submit to workshop, because you might say, oh, well, that's kind of a typo. I just forgot to take those out. I was experimenting and playing around as I'm doing here. But if you leave something in, or maybe you go through the whole thing and you just have a period after moving, and that's the only period there, readers will wonder why. And because they're engaging with you and your poem and they're trying to make sense of things, and they assume that you're being intentional and that every single choice you've made means something, they might spend a lot of time trying to figure out what those remnants mean and feel a little disappointed if they can't come up with anything. Right? So it is important that as you're revising, you go through and you look at those choices. Here, let's take a look at the poem with the punctuation in, and you'll notice that those kind of deep breaths at the end of the lines don't change. There are quite a few pieces of punctuation that end a line. And then those moments in the poem just slow us down a little bit. This purple carpet smells of stale sweat. The soft staccato of steel plates in the circuit grounds grunts of men and women who've come here to work. Our voices join this found song. Encouragements, chides, jokes between sets, and recounts of doctors' checkups. Right? So as I'm going, I'm not doing any mental work about those moments. When I see a comma, I know I pause a little, and I know that I don't pause as much when I see a period, right? And I know when I see that colon, well, probably a list is coming. So your readers' brains are trained to respond to that, but they're not as used to reading things without punctuation. So, tip, if you want the if you want people just to kind of pay attention to the words, punctuating completely in the poem is going to be really invisible to your readers. At least I feel that way as a reader of poetry and writer myself. So if you don't want to call any attention to that, punctuate it. And if you choose to take out all of the punctuation, make sure that the choices then that you are making with line breaks or choosing not to break lines, make sure that they make sense and that the feeling that the readers have while they are reading match with what the speaker's talking about. Let's take a look here. So now I have gone one step further to include stanza breaks. And so this has no punctuation, but I do have those stanza breaks to provide longer, right, breaks as we go through. This purple carpet smells of stale sweat. The soft staccato of steel plates in the circuit grounds grunts of men and women who've come here to work. Our voices join this found song, encouragements, and so on. And so when you put in a stanza break, it adds a little bit more. The reason why I chose not to stick with prose for this particular poem, I discussed it before, was because I wanted this to slow down, right? I didn't want the speaker to be, like racing through it so fast. I wanted the speaker to be deliberate. She's kind of going through and witnessing these different things and recognizing that this is, the same as when she go to the YMCA to work out pre-injury. And also honoring all of these details of people working so hard in this moment to heal themselves. So I decided to go with essentially this last one before publication, and I'm glad that I did, where I have full punctuation, because to me, I liked that structure in there. I liked that it was invisible. This is a person in a gym with equipment, and so there is a structure in there, and there are physical trainers making sure that they use it correctly. So thematically, I felt that sticking with punctuation made sense to me. This is a person who's kind of like placed in the hands of an expert, and that expert is making sure that she's staying safe as she goes through her therapy, and everybody in that room was in the same boat. So it made sense to me to keep the punctuation in there for that reason. And then I also chose to go shorter lines to slow it down, and then slow it down even further by doing couplets in this case to right, let's let's take everything in because there's so much to see. When you're looking at the poems that you've written before you submit them to workshop, and then also when you're looking at everybody's in workshop, some things that you can think about are how are you making choices that thematically connect to what your poem is about. When I talk about thematically, I'm thinking about how the line breaks, stanza breaks, punctuation, caesura, that spacing that happens, the position on the page, right? The decision to left justify it or put it in the center or right justify it or have a lot of white space or to have it all real tight up in there together. All of those things visually leave an impression on the reader when they come before they read the title and start to engage with the poem, right? Oh, this looks very open and loose. Oh, this looks really tense. Oh, okay, well, this is different. I haven't seen this before. Or, oh, this feels very familiar, but oh no, this is, whoa, I've never read anything like this before. So you have that visual thing. And then when you're thinking about thematic, I really like to make a connection between how do I physically feel reading a poem, right? So just viscerally, how am I reading the poem? Am I getting tense? Am I getting frustrated? Is it really pleasant, very meditative? How does that connect to the way the speaker is feeling or observing, right, in the poem, or the imagery or the life lesson, right? You can mismatch different types of decisions. And we took a couple of looks at that in our readings where we saw a poem start very, Paige Lewis's, very kind of comfortably and very familiar, and then by the end it just broke apart and was all over the place. And so that to me kind of shows that pivotal moment where the speaker feels, okay, I really have it in control, and I'm just letting loose, or, oh, I'm falling apart in this moment. So you can do a lot with the structure of a poem. And in my opinion, that's what makes poetry so fun. It's kind of an extra layer on the work you're already doing with all of the strategies that you're using in prose. So as you're looking at your own poems and revising, and also looking at other poets' poems in the course, I recommend you think about, what does the poem mean to you, right? You read the poem, stop, right? What does it mean to you? Not necessarily just what happens. And if you're like, I don't know what this means, maybe what happens in the poem is a good place to start, right? I see a person sitting still in a car wondering about something, but I'm not sure what sort of resolution that person comes to. So a very familiar scene, but I'm not sure what I should take away from it. Or maybe you read the poem, you're like, oh, that person, they're trapped in the car. So many connections to how I feel about isolation right now. Oh, totally spoke to me, right? And you have these two different people reading the same poem with very different meanings to them. Oh, it's about love. What? Right? So capturing what it means to you, what you think it's about, what life lesson you take from the poem can be really helpful to the poet. And you yourself are going to appreciate that kind of feedback. So you kind of get a sense of, all right, everybody's on the same page, or wow, I've written a poem that can be interpreted in a ton of different ways. And then as a poet, you decide, am I okay with that? Do I like that freedom? Or do I need to tighten anything up or make some different changes or add in some clues so that I get people towards the meaning I really wanted them to take away? Another thing that you can ask are, what are the moments in the poem where you get stuck? One of my favorite poets is Ted Kooser. In fact, the laptop is sitting on his book right now, a foundation of my practice. He was a US poet laureate some years back. And in his book, he talks about the dropped sunglasses moment. He describes a time from his past where he was on a flat bottom boat in Florida and looking through that glass bottom into the scene where he saw all of these fish, right, swimming, and he got totally immersed looking at those fish, imagining what it would be like to swim with those fish, enjoying the beauty, and then all of a sudden somebody else looking down, right, their sunglasses fell and all of the fish scattered. So he makes a parallel between the poet kind of creating this world that the reader just gets sucked into and is in a place of wonder and beauty and absorbing what it means to them. And then having a moment in the poem where it's that plume, that plastic hitting the glass, destroying the scene. And so those would be moments as a reader that you're looking for. You might just ask a question. It could be a line break that you just have to keep going back over and read again and again to be able to figure it out. Let the poet know. It could be a big question, right? I don't understand how the poet has moved from this feeling of isolation to this great feeling of joy. There's a disconnect here. Or why would the speaker in the poem do that? It might also be, I have a hard time picturing this, right? And that might be a place where, as a poet, you might want to include a leap into that poem to pull something that might be more of a shared experience into that very unique moment to help people understand. Another thing you can do is point out moments of clarity, beautiful images where you're really feeling what the speaker in the poem is talking about and the emotions the speakers are having. Let poets know you don't want them to go in and start revising and mess up all those good moments for you as a reader. So definitely point those out. Let the poet know how the structure is influencing you, right? If you have a poem that's all about order and it's centered on the page and there's a lot of space and it's all very fluid, how does that feel, right? Um, yeah, how does that feel? Or if you have a poem that's all tucked up as prose and you don't get any breaths and it's trying to tell you this story and you start to get exhausted, right? Is that appropriate for how the speaker is feeling? Or could you use a little space, right? And another thing you could think about is what could be cool. I would love to know more about what this looks like, or I'd love to know what the speaker thinks about that there, or having a leap in this moment would be really cool. And you can, just say, I think this could be cool, and share that with the poet. So we're looking at these poems this week and thinking about how all of the decisions the poet made affects us and our understanding. We walk away from the poem, what are we left with? And is that a great experience? Could it be greater? And so that's what we're focusing on this week as we start to head into right, a revision season and putting together your e-portfolio, which we'll be talking about next week. So the focus right now is workshop, polishing up those 4 poems, and then we will be turning our attention to creating your collection for the term and also the final exam. I hope that you are having fun exploring poetry in many different ways this week, and that you enjoy reading your peers' poems. And I cannot wait to see how your poems develop. Take care.